I have some questions for you as we get started this morning. I'm just curious, and these are more like rhetorical questions to get the blood flowing. Is it unchristian to own a $250,000 home? Is it unspiritual to love New York style pizza? Is it ungodly to spend 3 hours a day playing guitar or PlayStation? Is it unchristian for a woman to care about her physical appearance? Is it ungodly to spend 40 hours a week earning money? Is it ungodly to spend 8 years of your life on an education to become a medical doctor so that you can heal bodies that are going to die? Is it unspiritual to buy a $500 lawnmower to cut your grass, which will regrow in 1 week, simply for the sake of the aesthetic beauty of your home and neighborhood looking nice? Is that unspiritual? And I suspect that you probably know that the answer to these questions is something like, well, it depends. Right? All of these questions are dealing with the very difficult relationship between the Christian and the temporary physical world. The Christian and society, the Christian and culture, the Christian and money, the Christian and recreation, the Christian and entertainment, the Christian and the physical body, the Christian and the family, the Christian and education, the Christian and the temporary, physical, present, perishing age. What is the relationship between those two things? And I think that it is important for the success and the fruitfulness of our mission to understand that relationship. The effectiveness of our missionary assignment requires us to understand our relationship to the world in which we live. And I think that it would be helpful for us to explore that this morning as we continue going through our sermon series entitled A Life on Mission. That's what we're talking about. And let me bring you up to speed on where we were last week. And I'll just kind of say this very quickly. Typically, as you guys know, the style of the teaching that I most enjoy and that I feel kind of most drawn to and compelled to provide for the church is known as expositional teaching. Meaning I just open up a text and then we just walk through it. And we go through a book and we just walk through it. And you know what that prevents me from doing is getting on my soapboxes and always preaching on the things that I want to preach on and avoiding all the things that I don't want to preach on. It just keeps me accountable, and it keeps us being fed with the Word of God. Every once in a while, I will stop and I'll do something like this, a series where we just hit a topic, because it allows me to just kind of give an overview of the Christian life. So we're talking about the Christian life on mission. This idea of mission. This idea of mission comes from the biblical teaching that God has a mission. We talked about this last week. God is on a mission, and his mission kind of contains these two impulses, you might say. An impulse to reveal his glory, which he is doing supremely through his Son, Jesus Christ. And then this other impulse that God has, which is to create people who appreciate that revelation. I talked about it in terms of the revelation of God's glory and the celebration of God's glory. What's God up to in the world? He's displaying who he is, and he's making worshipers of who he is. Revelation, celebration. Make sense? We talked about that last week. Now, the church's mission is connected to God's mission. That is to say that when the church is given her assignment, it is not disconnected from that overarching macro mission that God is on. The church's assignment lines up with and is drawn from what God's doing in the world. And so the church, too, is committed to the revelation and the celebration of the glory of God. That's why we come and we preach the Word of God so that He is revealed, and we call people into worship of this God. Revelation and celebration. We do it every single week. And if you look at the way that the Bible in the New Testament talks about the church's job, the way that the revelation and the celebration of Jesus Christ goes forward in the church's assignment is through gospel-centered discipleship. We go with the gospel to the nations, and we make disciples of all nations. And I'm kind of combining Acts 1:8 together with Matthew 28, the Great Commission, and the message, gospel-centered responsibilities that Jesus gives to the apostles in Acts chapter 1. I'm taking those two things, I'm smashing them together. I'm saying gospel-centered discipleship. That's what the church is doing. And as the church does gospel-centered discipleship, the mission of God goes forward. We talked about that last week. We also talked about the fact that if that's going to be successful, it means, one, we have to embrace that gospel for ourselves. It's got to fire us up. It's got to be precious to us. We got to know what the gospel is, and it has to be beautiful to us. You know that verse, Matthew 13:44. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field that a man found and covered up. And then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has so he can buy that field. That's what your life ought to look like as a Christian. You discover the treasure of the gospel. And everything in your life that stands in the way of you having the Jesus of that gospel, everything in your life that stands in the way, you get rid of it so you can have Him, like a treasure hidden in a field. You go sell everything you have so that you can buy the field. You're so fired up by what you've found. That's the impact that the gospel should have on our lives. And we will not go make disciples of all nations if that gospel isn't precious to us. That's the first thing that has to happen if the mission is going to be successful. We talked about that last week. You guys remember? Here's the second thing that has to happen if that mission is going to be successful. We have to embrace not only the gospel for ourselves, but we have to embrace that we are the plan for mission advancement. We are God's plan. There's no plan B. The church is who takes the mission forward as we make disciples of all nations. So, we got to love this gospel. We got to embrace that we are the plan. That's what we've talked about so far in our series. My friend Brian Howard planted a church in California several years back. And Brian said that he spent a lot of time pouring into his church and understanding that, guys, we are missionaries. And his church got to the point where they said, Brian, we get it. And we believe it. And we mostly love it. But how do you live a missionary life? And so Brian did a sermon series on how to live a missionary life. And he said, Jeremy, you should preach this sermon series. And he gave me all his notes, and I took a lot of what he had to say, and I'm just regurgitating it for you in this sermon series. Okay? So that's what we're doing. We're taking the fact that we, as people who embrace the gospel, love it like a treasure, and we are the plan to now take the mission forward. We are going to live like missionaries. We're called to live like missionaries, and how in the world do we do that? That's what this whole sermon series is designed to do, is start answering or try to answer the how question. We do have a certain approach that we're going to take. And what I want to do right now is share with you 3 approaches that we're not going to take. 3 approaches that have been taken by churches historically as they approach this calling to advance the mission. And my point right now is not to bash what has happened historically. It's not to bash what other churches may be doing. That's not my point. What I'm trying to do is clarify what we're going to do. We have a calling. I want to clarify what we're going to do. And what I want to do is I want to kind of surround that by saying, so we're not going to do this, and we're not going to do this, and we're not going to do this. And as I point those things out, my point is not to bash those things necessarily. I'm going to a little bit, but that's not my point. My point is I want you to know what we're doing, and I want you to believe in it. Because I believe that it's biblical. And I believe, and I will point out the ways in which other things are not biblical. And I will start with what is known as a theologically liberal approach. I'm not talking about political liberalness. I'm talking about liberal theology. Liberal theology is a thing that emerged in the early 19th century in Germany. And it's a whole school of thought. And the essence of the liberal theological way of thinking is that you remove the supernatural realities from the Bible and the Bible stories, and you replace them with kind of social principles and scientific proof. So that the main point is not in the Bible the miraculous death and resurrection of Jesus for sins. It's not salvation. It's not eternal life. You see, Jesus didn't really walk on the water. It was a submerged sandbar. This is real stuff. People believe that, well, liberal theology teaches that. That's what actually was happening here. It's just a submerged sandbar. Everything has a here and now scientific explanation. And rather than promoting the supernatural and cosmic events of the Bible, Christianity is reduced to something that consists merely in its social benefits. And the approach then to the mission is kind of like, these are good principles for just promoting a unified society. And the gospel of Jesus Christ gets reduced to a social program, a humanistic social gospel of human progress and ethical living. And the church essentially becomes a social organization. And this is what happened to many of the mainline denominations in the last 100, 150 years in the United States. Denominations that were once known for their great adherence to the faith and have now become socially loyal. And that's kind of all it is. And salvation does not consist of eternal life. It consists of things like eliminating poverty, which is a great thing, by the way. It's just a surface issue, and it doesn't get down to the heart of what Jesus came to do. So we're not going to take that approach. It is an approach that has been very popular in the last 150 years. But that's not how God's mission goes forward. I'm not interested, and I know you guys aren't interested in a mere social revolution. That's not what we're doing. Here's a second approach. It's known as the revivalist approach. Now, unlike the theological liberal approach to the mission, the revivalist approach actually gets the gospel right. It's an understanding of the death of Jesus for sins, the resurrection of Jesus from the dead, salvation by faith alone, by grace alone. All of that is on with the revivalist approach. The problem is that the task of sharing the gospel in the revivalist approach mainly falls on the shoulders of one person. Who? The preacher. Okay? Now, it is the preacher's job to preach the gospel. But in the revivalist approach, the Christian missionary activity essentially consists of, you guys need to bring people to church so that I can close the deal. Instead of understanding that ministry is something that is not for a select few, ministry is something that every single Christian is called to. And the mission is something that every single Christian is called to. So that's not our approach, because there's a better way for the mission to move forward. A third approach to the advancement of the mission is known as a seeker approach or a seeker-sensitive approach. And the idea here, as with revivalism, is let's get people in the doors of the church so that the church can close the deal. Now, again, the issue here, one issue here is going to be that it kind of removes everybody else from the sense of responsibility to get the gospel to people. The other issue with the seeker movement is that it's mainly concerned with making people who don't know Jesus comfortable. And the way that we make them comfortable is by watering down and kind of avoiding things that Jesus says that are controversial and hard, so that people will stay at your church, and so that people will follow Jesus. The problem is, of course, if you won't listen to what Jesus has to say when he says hard things, you're not actually going to be able to follow Jesus. And what happens in a church that adopts that approach is that it increasingly looks more and more and more like the culture. It just adopts a resemblance to the culture and refuses to speak to the hard things where the Bible really clearly speaks to the hard things. And so that is not the approach that we're going to take, because there's a better way for mission to move forward. The approach that we're taking is known as a missional approach to the mission. A missional approach. The missional approach to sharing Christ maintains that it is the privilege and the responsibility of every single Christian to recognize their calling to the mission. Ministry is not the calling of a select few, it's the calling of every single follower of Jesus. A missional approach does not expect unbelievers to come flocking to churches. Rather, a missional approach equips the church and sends the church out there into the city where all the people who don't know Jesus are. It's a go make disciples approach rather than bring them here and I will do it for you. My job in a missional approach is not mainly to do all the work of the ministry, it's mainly to equip you guys so that we as a team, as an army, are going into the city and living like missionaries. A missional approach is a missionary approach to the work of the kingdom, and it embraces the idea that we have all been sent here by God, and he intends to use us in the harvest. So we don't have like a missions department, or we don't have like a mission program as part of our church, or we don't have a certain segment of people that we say, hey, whoever's interested in mission, we're going to have a meeting afterwards. Because we don't have that, because it is fundamental to our identity. We are a missionary community. Does that make sense? That's what a missional approach is. Everybody gets to be a part of this. Everybody is called to be a part of it. We embrace what Charles Spurgeon said. Every Christian is either a missionary or an imposter. And that's why I say, okay, I think this actually is the biblical way of thinking about this, or the most biblical of the different options that I threw out. And if our approach is missional, then how are we going to do it? Here's step one. And this is kind of the meat of where we're headed. Step one is this. Our mission requires us to go into and to operate within this world. Our mission requires us to go into and to operate within this world. Which brings us to where we began. What's the relationship between the Christian and this world? This perishable world, this temporary world. What's the Christian perspective on culture and medicine and entertainment and possessions and food and the environment? What's the Christian perspective on those things? And I'm hoping you begin to feel why this is so important to talk about, because what we're dealing with is basically the context of the assignment we've been sent into, right? What's the battlefield look like? So that's what we're going to do. And I'll just give you the gist of where I'm headed today with this. We are called to pursue the mission in the context of a corrupted, perishable, temporary, material world. It's corrupted, it's broken, it's perishable, it's dying, it won't last, it's temporary, it's physical. And God made it. And in the beginning, He called it. And there's tension with those two things. I want to explain today that when we are called to live in this world, and when you look at the way that Christians handle that, there are two mistakes that people tend to make. At least two. I'm going to talk about two mistakes that people tend to make when it comes to living in this world. On the one hand, some people believe that they are living in this world and they treat it as though it were ultimate. So one mistake is what I'm just going to call like materialistic hedonism, where everything that you live for is here and now. It's a YOLO, eat, drink, be merry, because tomorrow we're going to die. Get every ounce of pleasure out of this world that you possibly can. Here and now mentality. When I say we are called to live in this world, that's one way that Christians go with it. Live your best life now. I mean, there was a book by that title, written by what is maybe the pastor of the largest church in the nation. That's one side. And the other mistake that we tend to make is to live in this world as though the material, physical creation is not good. A form of an ancient heresy known as Gnosticism that plagued the early church. The belief that since the eternal things are the ultimate things, the temporary things and the physical things don't matter. And that also is a mistake. The biblical perspective is to reject actually both of those perspectives. We have to reject that this world is ultimate, and we have to reject the notion that the physical and material creation is a bad thing. And the Christian biblical perspective lies somewhere else. It has a different viewpoint. The Christian perspective is that this world is not ultimate, and yet the glory of God is on display in and through the creation that is good. And when we get a grasp on this, it affects the fruitfulness of our mission. When we start living this way, it actually affects our ability to be fruitful in the mission that God has given to us. So let's talk about these two views and these two mistakes. I'll just kind of elaborate on them a little bit and see if we can just get our heads around it. First of all, let's talk about this. Christianity does not promote materialism, and it doesn't teach that this world is ultimate. This is very clearly the perspective of the Bible, the New Testament, perhaps even especially that becomes clarified in the New Testament. We do not believe that this world provides the greatest pleasures. And we don't invest in this world as though material possessions and personal comfort and the pleasures of the world are the most valuable treasures available. The Bible is really clear on this. Listen to these teachings from Jesus, and you're familiar with these and many more. Mark 8, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? What's more valuable, the world or your soul? Your soul is. What does it gain you if you get the whole world, every possession possible, and you lose your soul? It was a bad deal. Why? Because the soul's more valuable. Clearly, that's the perspective of the New Testament. Or take this, Matthew 10. Do not fear those who can kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. What should you care more about, your body or your soul? Your soul. That's by far more important. Paul confirms this. He says in 1 Timothy 4, train yourself for godliness. For while bodily training is of some value, godliness is of value in every way, as it holds promise for the present life and also for the life to come. You can train your body, and it's of some value in this life. But if you train yourself for godliness, it's of value in this life and in the life to come. So what's more important? Bodily training or spiritual training? Spiritual training, right? This is really clearly what the Bible teaches. It's the perspective of the New Testament. The eternal is our priority because the things of this world are fading away. They won't be here forever. And so it's foolish to invest in this world as though the things of this world are going to stick around. And that should impact the way that you live. It should impact the way that you treat possessions and money and vacation and home and car. Listen to what Jesus says, Matthew 6. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth. And then he tells you why you shouldn't do that. That's where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. You store your treasure up here, it's going to disappear. It's a stupid idea. That's the point. Now, Jesus is not against you saving up treasure. Just don't put it in a stupid place. Here's what he says. Lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. And here's why. Where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. Don't invest in currency that has a short lifespan. At least don't invest everything. It's just dumb. And so, our investment in our health, in our bodies, in our pursuit of pleasure, and food, and sex, and alcohol, our attention to recreation and art, and the prosperity of our bank accounts, and our neighborhoods, and our city, ought to all be done mindful of the fact that this place is not ultimate, so be careful that you don't put all of your investment in it, right? That's the New Testament perspective. Be careful that you don't live for this world as though it's ultimate. That's not what's most valuable to us. And if we live in this world like this world is ultimately the most valuable thing to us, it will damage the mission. It's going to do damage to what we're trying to do because our lives will communicate to all these people that we're reaching out to that all we have to offer is this world. And we're chasing after the same thing, frankly, that they're chasing after. And if we give them the message or the impression that Christianity wants you to live your best life now, it's actually going to be something that appeals to some people because that's what they're looking for. But you know who it won't appeal to? It won't appeal to the dozens or hundreds or maybe even thousands of people in your life that you will have influence on who have already figured out that there is something missing in this world. And you know how they figured it out? They already tried investing everything in this world, and it left them flat. They already tried investing in their health and their beauty, and illness took it away. They invested in a relationship, and it fell apart, and they can't get it back because he's dead now. They've already invested. And they have found that the pursuit of money and possessions didn't say, I got it all already. There are people who got it all already. And you know what they realized? This is not what I'm looking for. And so if all we are offering to this world is the things of this world, we're damaging the mission, because there are plenty of people who already know that this world doesn't have what they want. They're looking for something beyond this world. And we can offer them that. So it's important, if we want to be effective in the mission, that we live in this world, but we are careful that we don't do it as though this world is everything. We keep a loose grip as we do it. That's a corrective to oneness. Now, here's what happens. We learn this principle, that this world is not ultimate, and we prioritize the eternal things. We come kind of back into a more biblical place. And what do? We tend to just slide right off the other side of the ropes. This is what tends to happen. It's exactly what happened to the church in Corinth. The church in Corinth realized that the most important things were not the temporal things of this world, but the supernatural realities of the kingdom of God. And they drew the false conclusion, therefore, that what happens in the body doesn't matter. And because what happens in the body doesn't matter, it produced in their church two very weird responses, sinful responses. One group of people, 1 Corinthians chapter 6, said, well, okay, since the things in the body don't matter, we can do what we want with our bodies. And so they had sex with prostitutes. Go read 1 Corinthians chapter 6. I mean, this church was screwed up. Now, another group of people who bought the same lie applied it very differently. They said, okay, since the supernatural things are the most important things, we're going to give ourselves to this supernatural spiritual life, and the things of the body don't matter. And they stopped having sex, husbands and wives. And in fact, because it really is the spiritual that matters, it's probably best that we just aren't married at all. And they divorced one another. 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Same lie, two very different applications. Both of them wrong. See, what the Corinthians did, and what we tend to do, is assume that the supreme importance of eternal things means that the things of this world don't matter, and maybe even that the things of this world are somehow intrinsically evil. And that the enjoyment of the pursuit of vacation, or the pursuit of money, or possessions, or your health, or your beauty, or your pleasure, or your food, or decorating, or sex, or art, or recreation, or medicine, or the prosperity of your city is for people who aren't really spiritual. Because people who are spiritual don't really mess with trivial earthly things like that. It's the super spiritualized response to the truth that we just learned. That the things that are present are not ultimate. And you know what's really sad about it? Is that just as there are many Christians who live as though the world is everything, there are also many, many Christians who live as though God's creation is intrinsically evil. And lots of Christians are even known for this, like the super spiritual Christian who won't watch movies unless Kirk Cameron's in it. As though we've forgotten that our faith teaches that our God is the mastermind behind human culture. It's His idea. Sex? Sorry, I know we don't have the room for the kids. It's His idea. He's the one who came up with it. Now, he's got like some boundaries of how this is supposed to go down, but within the boundaries of his design, this is a beautiful thing, and it glorifies him. And you know what else glorifies God? Good food. And you know what else glorifies God? Well-managed finances. And you know what else glorifies him? A hospitably decorated home. Students who study hard glorify God. When we care about how we dress and present ourselves, that can glorify God. Medicine that saves lives, that glorifies God. Good art can glorify God. Family vacations can glorify God. The prosperity of a city can glorify God. A hard-working employee glorifies God. When Christians care about these things, it glorifies God. You see, the world that God created is intended by God to put God on display. The world that God created is intended by God to put God on display. Paul says in Romans chapter 1 that the creation makes the eternal power and divine nature of God known. And that includes culture. It makes him known. It shines him forth. John Calvin once said, "The whole world is a theater for the display of the divine goodness, wisdom, justice, and power. But the church is the orchestra." The world is the theater, and the church is the orchestra. So we are supposed to be putting God on display in this world as we participate in this world. This world is not ultimate, but it is the temporary stage upon which we live so that the world around us might see the glory of God in and through us as we participate in this world. We are to be about the mission of bringing the gospel of Jesus Christ into our city, to our neighbors, as people who live alongside our neighbors in the city, participating in the city together with them. The missional approach recognizes that God has called us into the theater of everyday life. If you hear one sentence this morning, I want it to be that. The missional approach recognizes that God has called us into the theater of everyday life. Now, we have to make all sorts of qualifications when we talk this way. We're supposed to be out there participating in the city. Look, we have to filter that with a thick dose of, here's the kind of lifestyle the Bible calls us to live. I'm not saying, go live in the city and live like the devil. Okay? That's not what I'm talking about. And I realize that, of course, and I'm going to talk about that next week, by the way. I'm going to talk about how we're supposed to live in this city. I'm not saying that we're going to see perfectly eye to eye on how we're supposed to engage in all these things. Like, we may have different opinions about what kind of education is the best kind of education. We may have different kinds of opinions about what kind of vacation goes too far. We may have different opinions about what kind of house is too big, or how do you know if you're obsessing too much about your health, or how you can go wrong in all of these areas. And we may have different opinions about where that is, but my point today is not to make all the qualifications. My point is simply this. For the sake of the mission, we need to realize that Christians are not anti-creation. We are not fundamentally anti-sports, anti-possessions, anti-fun, anti-body, anti-culture, anti-material world. We believe in a physical resurrection from the dead, and your eternal state, I don't know if you know this, the eternal state of the Christian will not be disembodied spirits floating through some hazy, blissful, lit up cloud for eternity. You will have a new body. You will live in a physical creation. You'll touch stuff, eat stuff, swim, jump, fly. I don't know. It's going to be physical. We are not anti-matter. We are just the opposite. We are for the creation. We don't treat it as though it's ultimate. We're not materialistic hedonists. But we're not against the creation, and we shouldn't withdraw from it. That's part of what I'm getting at. Christianity does not call you to withdraw from the creation. We are for the body. We are for the city. We are for the environment. We are for science, because we're for the glory of God in and through this broken world. And when we live that way, it helps with the mission. Because as we enter into this world as his representatives, and we participate in the broken, temporary performance on the stage of everyday life, as we walk side by side with people who don't yet know Jesus, we live with a sense of awareness and gratitude to God for all that we see in the world. You know what we have the opportunity to do? We have the opportunity to shine to all the people who live in that same world. That's where they live. And God calls us out into it. And it's, I kind of wish we didn't have to walk the razor's edge. I kind of wish Jesus just said, you know what, it's just bad, stay out of it. Or he just said, it's good, drink till you're drunk. Give it, just go all out, just enjoy without reserve. He doesn't do that. He says, no. Don't live for money like it's ultimate. But you're going to have to work and make some money, and make good financial investments, and be responsible with your finances and provide for your family. But don't live for it. But it's good. And you know what that requires you to do? You can't withdraw, and you can't dive in recklessly. You have to walk the razor's edge. And you walk by the Spirit, and you live by the Word, and you go into the world, and you live like a missionary, and you participate in the world, knowing that you could fall off this side, and you could fall off that side. And by the grace of God, He will help us stay on the hard path that leads to life. And folks, that's the Christian life as a missionary in this world.